Check out these numbers. In 2024, FedEx made $87 billion in revenue. UPS, $91 billion. Now, here's where it gets weird. These companies have enough cash to buy entire fleets of brand new aircraft without breaking a sweat. But walk onto their ramps and you'll see something surprising. Planes that are over 40 years old, still flying multiple routes every single day. Between them, they're operating more than 230 Boeing 757s, a jet that stopped rolling off the production line in 2004. So what's the deal? Why are billion-dollar companies running planes older than most of their pilots? There's something else going on, and it will surprise you.
If you're also passionate about the world of aviation, consider subscribing to the channel and supporting our team.
To understand why the 757 refuses to retire from cargo operations, we need to go back to 1983. That's when Eastern Airlines and British Airways received the first Boeing 757s for passenger service. The aircraft was designed as a replacement for the aging 727, offering better fuel efficiency, greater range, and that distinctive narrow-body profile that could operate at large and small airports alike. But the real revolution came 4 years later, in '87, when UPS received the first 757-200 package freighter built specifically for cargo. Boeing had created something special, a freighter that could carry up to 15 cargo containers on the main deck, with a volume of 6,600 cubic feet on the main deck, plus lower holds with an additional capacity of 1,830 cubic feet, and still fly more than 3,150 nautical miles fully loaded. The 757 hit a sweet spot that's incredibly rare in aviation. It was large enough to be economically viable for substantial cargo. We're talking up to 87,700 pounds of payload, but not so massive that it needed major airport infrastructure or created waste on thinner routes. Boeing produced these freighters until 2004, with a total of about 80 units of the 200 PF cargo variant specifically built coming off the production line. But that's not where the story ends. When passenger airlines began retiring their 757s in the 2000s and 2010s, cargo operators saw an opportunity. Companies began converting passenger 757s into freighters, the 200SF, special freighter conversions, effectively extending the platform's lifespan for decades. To put this in perspective, FedEx and UPS together operate 238 Boeing 757 freighters today. These aren't a few legacy aircraft limping along, it's a strategic fleet decision. And that raises the obvious question, with all the modern alternatives available, why? The challenge in air cargo isn't what most people think. It's not just about moving boxes from point A to point B, it's about matching the right aircraft capacity with the right route density at the right frequency, while keeping costs competitive enough to profit on every flight. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you're managing cargo operations for UPS. You have a route from Louisville to somewhere like Portland, Oregon. Every night, you need to move somewhere between 30 and 40 tons of packages. Consistent volume, but not massive. The route is about 2,000 miles, so you need decent range. And critically, this needs to happen every night, reliably and profitably. Now you might be thinking, just use a bigger plane, like a 767 or 777 freighter. But here's the thing. These aircraft cost significantly more to operate per flight hour, need more fuel, more maintenance crew, and most importantly, have substantially more capacity. If you fly them consistently half-empty because your route doesn't generate enough volume, you're burning money on every flight. On the other hand, you could use something smaller, like a 737-800 freighter, but now you're limited to 23 tons of payload and shorter range. For many of these medium-range, medium-volume routes, you'd need multiple flights or leave cargo behind. Neither option is acceptable in the express cargo business, where time-definite delivery is everything. This is what aviation economists call the long, thin route problem. Long distance, but low demand. And it's surprisingly common in cargo networks. According to industry analysis, approximately 40% of major cargo routes in North America fall into this category. too substantial for small freighters, but not dense enough to justify wide-body aircraft. The 757 exists in this sweet spot, not too big, not too small, not too expensive to operate, and not too limited in capacity. With its payload capacity of 87,700 pounds and range of 3,150 nautical miles, it can handle the vast majority of medium-density cargo missions without waste. But there's another dimension to this problem that's even more critical: asset utilization. In cargo operations, aircraft need to fly as many hours as possible to maximize return on investment. The 757's flexibility, its ability to operate on shorter runways, its fleet standardization, its established maintenance infrastructure, means it can be deployed on multiple route types without the operational complexity that comes with introducing new aircraft types. Now let's talk about what really matters in aviation: economics. And this is where the 757 strategy becomes genuinely brilliant. Consider the capital cost situation. Most of these 757s were acquired decades ago, either as original freighters in the 90s or as conversions in the 2000s. The initial capital investment has long been amortized. What matters now isn't what they paid 20 or 30 years ago, but how much it costs to keep them flying today versus how much it would cost to replace them. Converting a used passenger plane into a freighter, whether a 737 BCF or A321 P2F, costs between $13 and $31 million total. This includes both purchasing the used aircraft and the complete conversion for cargo operations. For a fleet of 100 aircraft, you're looking at $3 to $4.5 billion in capital expenditure. Even for companies as wealthy as FedEx and UPS, that's not pocket change. And here's the critical question: what's the return on that investment? If the 757 is already executing the mission and its operating costs per ton-mile remain competitive, you're essentially asking shareholders to approve billions in spending for marginal operational improvements. It's a tough sell, especially when that capital could be deployed elsewhere.
But what about fuel efficiency? And yes, modern engines are more efficient. A new 737-800 with CFM56-7B engines will burn approximately 10 to 15% less fuel than a 757 with RB211 engines on comparable missions. But let's put this in context. If fuel represents about 30% of your direct operating costs, a 15% improvement in fuel burn translates to approximately 4 to 5% reduction in total direct operating cost. Now compare that to the cost of carrying $3 billion in debt for new aircraft. The math often doesn't favor replacement, especially when fuel prices are relatively stable. There's also the flexibility factor. Since FedEx and UPS already have mature 757 operations, established maintenance programs, trained mechanics, experienced crews, extensive parts inventory, the marginal cost of continuing operations is significantly lower than it would be for someone starting from scratch. Industry sources suggest that maintaining a 757 freighter costs somewhere between $5,000 and $8,000 per flight hour in direct operating costs, depending on configuration and age. And here's something most people don't consider: opportunity cost. Every route currently served by a 757 is a route that doesn't need to be served by a more expensive, higher-capacity aircraft. This means UPS and FedEx can deploy their 767s, 777s, and MD-11s on high-volume routes where their greater capacity is actually utilized. The 757 isn't holding back the fleet, it's optimizing the entire network. So, what does this look like in practice? Every night across North America, Europe, and increasingly in Asia, 757 freighters are flying routes that would be economically marginal with any other aircraft type. A significant portion of express cargo flights in North America operate on medium-density routes where the 757's capacity is ideal. This isn't a niche, it's a fundamental part of network architecture. Remove the 757 from this equation, and you're forced to make uncomfortable choices. Either fly larger aircraft with wasted capacity or reduce frequency and compromise service quality. The e-commerce boom has actually reinforced the 757's value. Online retail generates a specific cargo profile, high volume of relatively light packages, time-sensitive delivery requirements, and distribution to secondary cities, not just major hubs. This is precisely the mission profile where the 757 excels. FedEx reported that its 757 fleet flew more than 350,000 hours in 2023 alone, with an average flight time of about 3 to 4 hours. But let's acknowledge the limitations, because they're real. The 757 is aging. The youngest aircraft in most cargo fleets are now 15 to 20 years old, with many reaching 25 to 30. Age brings challenges: increased inspection requirements, potential for structural fatigue, growing difficulty in finding certain parts as the global 757 fleet shrinks. Maintenance costs tend to increase as aircraft age. What might have cost $5,000 per flight hour 5 years ago might now cost $7,000 or $9,000. At some point, that curve crosses the threshold where replacement becomes economically compelling. We haven't reached that point for most operators yet, but that day will come. So, what happens next? The 757 won't fly forever, but its retirement will be strategic, not sudden. Industry analysts expect the 757 freighter fleet to begin significant contraction sometime in the late 2020s, with most aircraft likely retired by the mid-2030s. That might seem distant, but in fleet planning terms, it's right around the corner. Aircraft acquisition and integration takes years. The decisions being made today will determine what replaces the 757 a decade from now. The most likely candidates are converted A321 freighters and potentially new medium freighters if Boeing or Airbus decide there's sufficient market demand. The A321 P2F, a passenger-to-freighter conversion, offers similar payload and range to the 757 with better fuel efficiency. But here's the catch: conversion slots are limited, and there's competition for available aircraft from multiple operators worldwide. UPS has already begun this transition, ordering A321 conversions. FedEx is expected to follow suit, but both companies are being deliberate. They're not rushing to replace the entire 757 fleet overnight. Instead, they're implementing a hybrid strategy: gradually introduce replacement aircraft on the most demanding routes while continuing to operate 757s where they remain cost-effective. Ultimately, FedEx and UPS's decision to continue operating Boeing 757 freighters isn't about being stuck in the past, it's about being smart with capital in the present. These aircraft still perform a critical mission that no other aircraft type can match as efficiently, moving medium volumes of cargo over medium distances with the frequency and reliability that express logistics demands. The 757 will eventually retire, but until that day comes, it will continue flying, profitable, reliable, and doing exactly what it was designed to do 40 years ago.